Sit with this idea for a moment. The voice inside your mind, it has been speaking to you your entire life. But tell me honestly, has it been your guide or your enemy? The way you speak to yourself is not just a habit. It quietly becomes the foundation of how you experience everything in your life. Every thought you repeat, every sentence you whisper internally shapes your emotions, your confidence, and even your actions. Most people are not aware of this because the voice feels so familiar that it goes unquestioned. It feels like truth, even when it is harsh, limiting, or completely untrue. When your inner voice constantly tells you that you are not good enough, your body responds to that message. Your energy drops, your motivation weakens, and your actions begin to reflect that belief. You hesitate more, you doubt more, you hold yourself back without realizing that it all started from a simple sentence in your mind. Over time, these repeated thoughts form a pattern, and that pattern becomes your reality. Not because it is true, but because it is repeated. In the same way, when you begin to shift your inner dialogue, something subtle but powerful begins to change. If instead of saying, "I always fail," you say, "I am still learning," your mind starts to open rather than shut down. One sentence creates pressure, while the other creates possibility. This is how your inner voice influences not just how you feel, but what you believe is possible for your life. Many people think that confidence comes from achievements, but in reality, confidence often begins with how you speak to yourself in moments of difficulty. When things go wrong, your inner voice either supports you or breaks you further. If it says, "This is hard, but I will find a way," you stay steady. If it says, "I can't handle this," you collapse under the same situation. The external event remains the same, but your experience of it becomes completely different. Your inner voice also shapes how you see the world around you. If you constantly criticize yourself, you begin to assume that others are judging you as well. If you treat yourself with understanding, you naturally extend that same understanding outward. The relationship you have with yourself becomes the lens through which you see everything else. This is why small changes in your self-talk can create deep changes in your life. It is not about forcing positivity or pretending everything is perfect. It is about becoming aware of the tone you use with yourself and choosing words that support growth instead of stopping it. Even a slight shift from criticism to curiosity, from judgment to patience, begins to change how your mind responds. Over time, this new way of speaking becomes natural. Your thoughts begin to work with you instead of against you. Your energy becomes more stable. Your decisions become clearer, and your sense of self becomes stronger. What once felt like a constant inner struggle slowly turns into a quiet sense of support that follows you in every situation. Negative self-talk does not usually appear in a loud, obvious way. It often slips into your mind quietly, repeating familiar phrases you have heard or created over time. I'm not capable. This is too difficult. I always mess things up. These thoughts feel automatic, almost like they belong there. And because they come so quickly, most people accept them without question. They don't realize that every time they agree with these thoughts, they give them more strength. Interrupting negative self-talk begins with awareness. You cannot change what you do not notice. The moment you become conscious of a harsh thought, you create a small space between you and that voice. In that space, there is a choice. Not a reaction, not an emotional collapse, but a choice. This is where the shift begins. It is not about forcing the thought to disappear. It is about refusing to let it control the direction of your mind. When a negative thought appears, instead of fighting it or suppressing it, you gently pause. You acknowledge it without attaching yourself to it. Then you replace it with something more balanced and supportive, not something unrealistic or exaggerated, but something that allows movement instead of resistance. If the mind says, I can't do this, you respond with, this is challenging, but I can take one step. If it says, I'm a failure, you answer with, I am still learning, and mistakes are part of that process. This shift may seem small, but it changes the emotional impact immediately. Over time, you begin to recognize patterns in your thinking. Certain situations trigger the same negative responses. Perhaps it is when you make a mistake, face uncertainty, or compare yourself to others. Once you see these patterns clearly, you are no longer caught off guard. You start anticipating the negative voice, and instead of being pulled into it, you meet it with awareness and intention. This is how control slowly returns to you. It is important to understand that interrupting negative self-talk is not about becoming overly positive or ignoring reality. It is about speaking to yourself in a way that is honest but not destructive. You can acknowledge your weaknesses without attacking your worth. You can admit difficulty without deciding defeat. This balance allows you to stay grounded while still moving forward. At first, this practice may feel unnatural. The old voice will try to come back stronger, repeating familiar criticisms. But each time you interrupt it, even for a moment, you weaken its influence. Each time you replace it with a calmer, more supportive response, you build a new pattern. Slowly, the mind begins to adapt. What once felt automatic starts to lose its power, and what once required effort becomes a natural way of thinking. Most people move through life believing that every thought in their mind is a reflection of who they are. When a negative thought appears, they don't question it, they become it. If the mind says, I'm not good enough, they feel inadequate. If it says, something will go wrong, they feel anxious. There is no distance between the thinker and the thought. It all feels like one continuous experience. But the moment you begin to see that you are not your thoughts, something begins to shift. Thoughts are not permanent. They rise, they pass, and they change constantly. One moment your mind is calm, the next it is restless. One moment it is hopeful, the next it is doubtful. If these thoughts were truly who you are, then your identity would be changing every second. But something in you remains steady, watching all of this happen. That quiet awareness, the one that notices the thoughts, is closer to your true self than the thoughts themselves. When you begin to observe your thoughts instead of becoming them, you create space. In that space, thoughts lose their authority. A negative idea may still appear, but instead of pulling you into it, you simply notice it. You see it as a passing mental event rather than a fixed truth. This changes your entire relationship with your mind. You are no longer being dragged in every direction by every thought that arises. This practice does not require force or control. It requires presence. When a thought appears, you don't chase it and you don't push it away. You allow it to be there, but you remain aware that it is only a thought. Like clouds moving across the sky, they come and go without needing your reaction. The more you practice this, the more you begin to experience a sense of calm, even when your mind is active. As this awareness grows, you start to recognize how often your thoughts try to define you. They bring up past mistakes, imagined futures, and constant comparisons. Before, you may have believed every one of these stories. Now, you begin to see them for what they are. Patterns of the mind, not absolute truths. This realization reduces their emotional intensity. The same thought that once caused stress now feels lighter because you are no longer attached to it in the same way. This shift also changes how you respond to situations. Instead of reacting impulsively based on whatever thought appears first, you pause, you observe. And from that place of awareness, your actions become more intentional. You are no longer controlled by temporary mental noise. Instead, you move with clarity. Over time, this separation between you and your thoughts becomes more natural. You spend less time lost in unnecessary mental loops and more time grounded in the present moment. There is a quiet sense of control, not because you are controlling your thoughts, but because you are no longer controlled by them. The way you treat yourself in your own mind quietly determines how strong you feel in the world. Many people believe that strength comes from pushing harder, being more disciplined, or ignoring their emotions. But true inner strength often begins in a much quieter place. How you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. If your inner voice is constantly critical, impatient, or harsh, it slowly weakens your confidence, even if you appear strong on the outside. When you lack self-respect in your inner dialogue, you become your own source of pressure. You expect perfection, and when you don't meet it, you respond with disappointment or frustration. This creates tension within you. Instead of feeling supported by yourself, you feel judged. Over time, this makes challenges feel heavier because you are not only dealing with the situation itself, but also with the weight of your own criticism. Speaking to yourself with patience and kindness does not mean avoiding responsibility or ignoring your mistakes. It means choosing a tone that allows growth instead of shutting it down. When you make an error, instead of saying, "I always mess things up," you shift to, "I see where I went wrong and I can improve." This approach keeps you open. It allows you to learn without damaging your sense of self. Growth becomes something you move toward rather than something you fear. Self-respect in your thoughts also creates emotional stability. When your inner voice is steady and supportive, your emotions become easier to manage. Difficult moments still come, but they do not overwhelm you in the same way. You are able to face discomfort without collapsing under it, because you are not adding extra negativity through your own thoughts. There is a sense of balance that begins to form where you can experience emotions without being controlled by them. As you continue to speak to yourself with understanding, your relationship with yourself begins to change. You start to trust your ability to handle situations. This trust does not come from knowing everything or always getting things right. It comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you will not turn against yourself. That quiet assurance becomes a form of strength that is not easily shaken. This inner stability also affects how you interact with others. When you respect yourself internally, you naturally set healthier boundaries. You become less dependent on external validation because you are already giving yourself the support you need. You listen more carefully, respond more calmly, and carry a sense of grounded confidence that does not rely on proving anything to anyone. Over time, this way of treating yourself becomes your foundation. Even when life becomes uncertain or challenging, you remain steady because your strength is not built on external conditions. It is built on the consistent, respectful way you relate to yourself in every moment. Most people underestimate the power of consistency because they are focused on immediate results. They try something once, maybe twice, and when they don't see a dramatic change, they return to their old patterns. But the mind does not transform through sudden effort. It changes through repetition. Every thought you repeat becomes familiar, and what is familiar begins to feel natural. This is how patterns are formed, and this is also how they can be changed. When you practice mindful self-talk for even a short period, like 3 days, you begin to interrupt the automatic flow of negative thinking. At first, this interruption feels small and almost insignificant. You catch one thought, then another. You replace a harsh sentence with a calmer one. It may not seem like much, but each of these moments is a step in a new direction. The mind starts to notice that something is different. As you continue, these small changes begin to accumulate. The thoughts you choose to repeat start to shape your emotional state. Instead of constantly feeling pressure or self-doubt, you begin to experience moments of ease and clarity. This shift does not happen because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your inner response is becoming more balanced. The same situations that once triggered stress now feel more manageable. Simply, to them has changed. Consistency also builds trust within yourself. When you repeatedly choose to speak to yourself with awareness and patience, you send a message to your mind that you are reliable. You begin to see that you can guide your thoughts instead of being controlled by them. This creates a sense of inner stability that grows stronger with time. It is not based on motivation, which comes and goes, but on a steady practice that you return to again and again. There will still be moments when the old patterns try to return. This is natural. The mind holds on to what it has practiced the most. But each time you come back to mindful self-talk, you weaken those old patterns and strengthen the new ones. Even if you only become aware for a few seconds, that awareness matters. It reinforces the direction you are choosing. Over time, what once required effort begins to feel automatic. The supportive voice becomes more present, and the negative voice loses its intensity. You no longer have to constantly remind yourself to shift your thoughts because the new pattern has taken root. This is the quiet power of consistency. It does not create sudden, dramatic change, but it builds something far more lasting, a steady transformation that shapes how you think, feel, and respond in every moment. So now, the question is not whether this works. The question is, will you actually try it? Not for a lifetime, not for a month, just for 3 days. 3 days of catching your thoughts. 3 days of choosing better words. 3 days of standing on your own side instead of turning against yourself. Because if you can change your inner voice for 3 days, you will realize something powerful. You were never truly stuck. You were just listening to the wrong voice. And once you hear a calmer, wiser, more supportive voice within you, you cannot unhear it. It becomes your anchor, your guide, your quiet strength in moments when everything else feels uncertain. So when you leave here today, pay attention to the next thought that enters your mind, and instead of reacting automatically, pause, choose your response, speak to yourself with awareness, with patience, with respect, because the relationship you build with yourself will shape every other part of your life. And maybe after these 3 days, you will not just feel different. You will become someone who no longer needs to fight them Silvesto, move forward.